Welcome to another edition of TrilliumTalkTV. Something different, something better. Tonight I'm joined by Elizabeth Marshall. She's Director of Legal Research for the Ontario Landowners Association. She has a seat on the Board of Directors of the Canadian Justice Review Board. She is a legal researcher for Green & Associates, various MPs, MPPs, and councillors. Her book is called Property Rights 101, An Introduction, and it's in its second edition. She's also the Trillium Party candidate for Bruce Grey Owen Sound. Elizabeth, thank you for being part of Trillium Talk TV.
Well, thank you. And thank you, everybody, for joining us tonight. So, what do you want to know, Greg?
Well, I want to know, why are you doing this? Why enter politics?
I entered politics because I do legislative research, as we already know. And I started reading the legislative debates. And it's gotten systemically worse throughout the years. Now, this all started with Bill Davis, but it is culminated now in each party accusing each other party of breach of trust, which they have done. And there was no other avenue. So about a year and a half ago, I started looking for a party that, well, would suit me, because I felt that someone needs to do something to support the voice, the democratic rights, the law, and the truth for the people of Ontario, and in particular in my riding. As far as I'm concerned, the rural areas, they are being systemically harmed. I know there are similar issues in the urban areas, but we have school closures, we have bureaucrats out of control, we have planners out of control, just so many issues that, in an urban setting, it's not as, I don't know how you'd say it, over the top, overzealous.
Well, what does the Trillium Party have to offer Ontario that the Conservatives, the Liberals, the NDP can't offer?
Well, first and foremost, no whip votes. The only vote that should be whipped is the budget. And the only bill that should be an omnibus is the budget, because it amends various pieces of funding formulas and so on and so forth. Not having a whip vote means that the leader or the backroom boys have no control over me, and I will be able to stand up and represent my constituents. If something comes down the pipe that is unconstitutional, I can call them out on it, even if it's in my own party.
Have you seen this in action in the Trillium Party? Have they ever really stood up for their constituents?
Oh, you betcha.
in a situation where other parties might whip them into compliance?
Well, I just look at Jack McLaren. So there's Bill 139. We'll get right into that one. So Bill 139 actually repeals the Ontario Municipal Board. And if I'm looking up, I'm actually kind of quasi-reading. I apologize for that. But so it repeals the Ontario Municipal Board. It creates a planning tribunal. It creates a planning tribunal information center. But on top of that, there's an amendment to the Conservation Authorities Act, and that's section 30.1. Now, every party in the House voted in favor of this bill. And the reason that I brought up section 30.1 is because it talks about warrantless entry. So Jack McLaren, who is the Trillium Party MPP, was the only MPP to vote against warrantless entry. The PCs, the Liberals, and the NDP all voted in favor of that bill.
Wait, so warrantless entry on behalf of who? Who?
The Conservation Authority staffs under Section 28. So my whole thing would be, if I get elected, I want to ask the pointy questions of the Attorney General. Not even of the minister who presented the bill. I want to ask the Attorney General, because under the Attorney General's Act, the Ministry of the Attorney General, they have a duty to ensure that legislation is constitutional. So now my question is to the Attorney General. Under Section 8 of the Charter, there's no such thing as warrantless entry. Under the Criminal Code of Canada, there's no such thing as warrantless entry. Under the British North America Act and our common law rights, there is no such thing as warrantless entry. So, how can you possibly bring forward a section in the Conservation Authorities Act if you're going to be actively violating people's constitutional rights?
Wait, so have they actually ever done this? Has the Conservation Authority gone onto someone's property without a warrant?
Yes, they haven't. And actually, they even use flyovers.
What are they?
To spy on you.
Are they hoping to find you burying nuclear waste in your backyard?
Actually, it's even digging out a ditch so that your property won't flood. They have gone onto people's properties to protect the minnows in a mud puddle. Yeah. Whatever reason. Now, not all of them are that bad, but a lot of them are getting that bad. And they have this statement with the conservation authorities stating, oh, well, we're here to save lives. That's not your mandate. It's not in the act, and it's not what you were created for. So, because I've done a report on the conservation authorities, I've gone back to 1932 to the Grand River Commission, all the way through the legislative debates. And they have turned into an out of control entity. But then, we fund them. But on top of all of that, they fund an entity called Conservation Ontario. Now, this is crazy. This is a government entity creating a corporation to lobby government on behalf of government. So it's government having a third party entity lobby government on behalf of government. And you're paying for it. Through your property taxes.
So why can't they just get warrants like the OPP if they need to search somebody's property?
Oh, that might be work. And they may not have real reason.
What? This sounds completely crazy. Has this ever affected anyone? Have you heard of someone being seriously harassed or hurt by one of these conservation authorities?
Oh yeah. There's a number of cases out there where they've Dawson, I can't remember his last name. And that's where it was warrantless entry and so on and so forth, and the flyovers and so on and so forth. And it was thrown out. But you have to pay lawyers to go to court to defend yourself against something that shouldn't have happened in the first place. That is the problem. This is costing people so much money because of legal fees. And by the time you're finished with your court case, you are so exhausted, there is no way you're going to take the initiative to sue them back. People are exhausted from all of this. And it's gone beyond the pale of ridiculous. And that is the biggest problem. But it's not just the conservation authorities, it's bylaw inspectors, it's planners who have no respect. They're in the middle right now of doing all their official plans. So if you go through the Planning Act, there are a number of sections that direct them to the fact that they are to only plan for public, not private. And they can't seem to get that through their minds. Now, I'm not a lawyer. I do not give legal advice. But I've read through all these documents. I've gone all the way back to 1946, to the very beginning of the Planning Act, and followed all the way through. So the biggest problem is when you are reading legislation, you're to read the document in its entirety to know and understand what that document is telling you. And you have to take all of that into consideration. And if you don't read through it, and it's been stated time and time again in the courts, you must read the document in its entirety to know and understand the intent. And that is the biggest problem. Everybody is cherry picking these pieces of legislation, not reading the entire document and not understanding what the limitations of their authority really and truly are. I want to be able to come into Queen's Park and just say, I think, Minister of Municipal Affairs, you should be having a conversation with the various, planners, the various municipal councils, because you may or may not be putting them in jeopardy. Even at Roma, which is the Rural Ontario Municipal Association, they had a lawyer actually do a PowerPoint presentation, and he explained to them, look, municipalities, under Section 14 of the Municipal Act, you cannot create a bylaw, or if you do, it is void, that interferes or frustrates a superior piece of legislation or document. So that would be any piece of provincial legislation or federal legislation. That includes the Criminal Code of Canada. So how in the world can a municipality pass a bylaw that states, oh, our bylaw inspector has warrantless entry onto your private property? Now, there are sections in the Municipal Act for when property has been forfeited for non-payment of property taxes. Of course they have warrantless entry because it's been forfeited. So the bylaw inspector has to have the ability and the authority to go in and do an inspection before the sheriff sells it at auction. This is the instances. But like I said, so the Municipal Act is approximately 387 pages long. Then you have the Municipal Franchise Act. You have the Municipal Amendment Act. You have all of these pieces of legislation. Like right now, as of 2016 actually, in the province of Ontario, we have 380,000 regulations. That's according to government. Can you sneeze without breaking a regulation? I don't know, because there are so many regulations. The building code regulation is over 800 pages long.
So everybody's violating it somehow.
As far as I'm concerned, there is probably nothing you can do in the province of Ontario that you are not in violation of either a piece of legislation, a regulation, or a bylaw. And this has got to stop.
What about people who have gotten permits, say to build a shed in their backyard? They couldn't be in trouble from these conservation authorities, could they?
Sure they could. And that's the other big problem is, so you go to your municipality, you get a building permit. And because you didn't go to the conservation authority to get their permission and pay them for a permit and do the studies that they request, then they will charge you. And they will actually go after the person who issued the building permit in the first place. Been done. And yet, the conservation authorities are to be subservient to the municipalities, because the municipalities have the authority to dissolve the conservation authorities under Section 13.1 of the Conservation Authorities Act. And then it goes all the way through, and once they have proven that they can fulfill all the obligations of the conservation authority under that, then they have to get the final approval, and it used to actually be with the Ministry of Natural Resources. But for now, some lame reason, it is now the Ministry of Environment and Climate Change. And that has nothing to do with it, because the conservation authorities are actually to be under the Ministry of Natural Resources. So how this morphed into each other, I have no idea.
And the Liberals, Conservatives, and NDP
all voted in favor of it. Jack, our man, is the only one that said no to this act. But then he is the fellow who was thrown out of the legislative debates, the legislature, for telling the truth.
I have to ask. I mean, we've all seen the clip. It was very enjoyable. It got a lot of retweets on Twitter. What was he thrown out of the legislature for?
He was thrown out of the legislature. His first paragraph, he explained how they were breaking their own law. And then he was supporting his arguments, from what I understand, in the second paragraph with the information from the Auditor General, again stating that the government was breaking their own law.
So what law did they break?
I think it was the Electricity Act, and the criteria that they were to have a specific plan done within 5 years. Actually, I was so impressed with Jack. I was so gobsmacked that, I wasn't, after that point, I wasn't even paying attention. I was just going, oh my God. Jack stood up and they said, Mr. McLaren, withdraw that statement. And he says, it's the truth. And they said, withdraw that statement. And he says, can't withdraw the truth. Because that's Jack. And you can't withdraw the truth. But if he had withdrawn the truth, it would have been struck from public record. So this is the whole thing. But Jack, he just did it because Jack will not withdraw the truth. Like, people may not always like what we have to say, but we aren't going to lie. We're honest. And it's about time we had honest people in Queen's Park. Like, don't get me wrong. A lot of people who become elected officials, they think they're going to fix the world. Okay? And they go in there and they are good people. until they start getting whipped. Until the leader and the backroom boys come up with these, schemes, I guess you could call. We won't go down that rabbit hole, but they come up with these ideas on who can and cannot succeed. And so they hammer it down these MPP's throats. And if you dare to go against it, you are so abused. They send the whip in. They will throw you out of the caucus. You are ostracized. So they ended up, their soul dies. And their whole purpose for being there dies. And so they become absolutely useless.
Well, it sounds like politics at Queen's Park have taken an ugly turn recently. I mean, how far back would you say this goes? 5, 10 years?
No. Actually, this goes back to Bill Davis in 1973-74 and the creation of the Niagara Escarpment Planning and Development Act. And this is why they're all the same and all to blame. So Bill Davis, he decides to pass this Niagara Escarpment Planning and Development Act to protect the Niagara Escarpment. Anyways, but he decided to steal the land and the wealth from the people. These are not my words. These are the words of the legislators, okay? Anyways, so
wait, they expropriated land in the Niagara Escarpment.
They just didn't pay them for anything.
They didn't pay them. And did they not have the funds to buy the land?
Well, they had budgeted $20 million, but we were talking like hundreds of thousands of acres. So the whole thing is they knew they didn't have enough money. So what they decided to do was they put it into this geographical area, and the properties decreased in value by 90%. Actually, one of the, I think it was an MPP, had an appraiser do this. So Bill Davis and the PCs knew that they were stealing the land and the wealth because they were told that by the opposition. So, but the thing that gets me is, so Bill Davis eventually lost power. The PCs were out. And so then you had the Liberals come in and then the NDP. But the Liberals and the NDP, they didn't repeal that act after all of this time of railing against the PCs for stealing the land and the wealth. So they're all the same and all to blame. Fast forward, actually, this is the perfect one. In 2015, Andrea Horwath and the NDP brought forward a bill in Queen's Park to stop the sell-off of Hydro One and to decrease the cost of electricity. Well, the PCs voted with the Liberals against the NDP bill. Then you go to 2016, and the PCs presented basically the same type of bill, and the NDP voted with the Liberals against the PC bill. So none of them want to stop the sell-off of Hydro One. None of them want to bring the price of electricity down. They're all the same, and they're all to blame. And that's the problem, because it's so incestuous now. Like, if you looked at the People's Guarantee, I read the People's Guarantee. I went and I obtained as many as I possibly could of the supporting documents. And this is the crazy, crazy part. And I'm going to have to talk to you about the report on how to govern Ontario. But anyways, in that People's Guarantee, that PC platform, which Doug Ford is technically going forward with anyways, because he is offering that 12% more off of the price of electricity. Well, if he does that without repealing the Fair Hydro Plan and without fixing all of this bogus bookkeeping by the province through the IESO, then the debt is going to go from, say, 69 to 93 billion to probably over 145 billion dollars.
Well, hang on a sec. Back up for a second. So you're saying how exactly is the price of electricity going to come down? The IESO, what's that?
The IESO is the Independent Electricity Systems Operator, and it was actually merged with the Ontario Power Authority under the Electricity Act. Now, this is the entity that is supposed to give the nods and have all the regulatory criteria for the FIT programs, the feed-in tariffs.
Feed-in tariffs.
Yeah. So, but not only that, though, it also is the entity that funds the standbys, the peaker plants like the gas plants, which are used less than 1% of the time. And yet they are costing us $30+ million a year just to sit there. But on top of that, though, we're paying for other really neat things for these folks. We're paying for car washes. We're paying for carpet cleaners. We're also paying, what was it, $145,000 or $175,000 for winter coats for staff.
It's okay. It's okay. The way the CRA has been going after people for bogus expense claims, I'm sure they're going to be nailed for not having good reasons for those receipts.
Well, the Ontario Energy Board has actually tried to get the IESO to straighten this out. But the problem with that is the IESO has this committee, and the committee is actually made up of the people who benefit from all of this. So do you think they're going to change their rules? Even the Ontario Energy Board cannot get them to do it. This is why the Auditor General actually has all of this information in her 2017 report. And actually, it's in section 3.06 of that. So the whole thing that I'm getting at is, though, there was a report done on how to govern Ontario. And it was originally created for the PC party. They were in power at the time. They lost, the Liberals came in. So now it is the Liberals that are implementing the recommendations from that report. Now, this is back in 2004, and you're going, well, that's pretty old stuff. Well, this involves the smart meters. This involves increasing the cost of electricity to the paying public.
Wait. So there was an intentional plan to increase
an intentional plan to
the cost of
force
electricity.
People to conserve and to pay for renewable energy. This is also the report that says all-day kindergarten. Yes, all of this that we are suffering with now was made up by a panel. And the reason I'm saying they're all the same and all to blame, because the director of research in regards to that report is also a quotation, a footnote in the PC's present People's Guarantee. So they have the same advisors on how to govern Ontario.
Well, listen.
But, no, I'm not finished. No, I'm on a roll now with this report. Because it also recommends in that report to remove the democratic rights of the people of Ontario in regards to money and environmental issues, or we will end up like other jurisdictions, example, California. Well, California basically went bankrupt. So they are removing yours and your democratic rights to fund failed recommendations. Because as far as I'm concerned, if you're saying that you have to remove the democratic rights of people to fulfill the obligations and the recommendations in a report, then it is obviously a failed document. And these people should be run out of the country.
Yeah,
seriously.
No kidding. So they really intentionally planned for electricity prices to be this crazily high.
Yep.
Did they also plan to subsidize them with debt?
Well, no, actually, and oh my God! Well, we got to go back to the Auditor General's
Some of these
report.
genius moves were spur of the moment. They weren't all part of the document.
Well, you can do almost anything if you remove the democratic rights of the people, now can't you? But the big thing that got me too, also in the Auditor General's report, you and me and you are all subsidizing 65 industrial corporations for their electricity. They only have to pay between 6 and 7 cents a kilowatt hour. And you're paying for it. And that includes the global adjustment.
So if I start a heavy industry manufacturing firm, I
You
only
gotta
have
be
to
special.
pay. Okay.
You have to be special.
What do I have to do to qualify as special?
Oh, well, I have no idea. Maybe donate to the Liberal Party. I have no idea. Or the PCs or the NDP. Like, who was it? Mike Crawley. He came out with an article in 2016 on the top 30 donators to the political parties. So this is the whole thing. So there were 30 of them, and out of that 30, 15 of them were unions. Now, the donations that he had came forward with totaled up to $6.3 million. The unions donated $3.3 million. So if you're going to be able to buy political parties, you might as well. So now, fast forward to now, under the new rules, so if you're looking at Elections Ontario, you go to third-party advertisers. There's one entity whose head office is actually in Washington, D.C. So we have a foreign entity, technically, I would say, interfering with our elections by being a third party advertiser. Out of the 15, I think there's like 5 or 6 of them that are unions. And actually, it's very disturbing to me because the one union as a third party advertiser is Unifor. And Unifor is actually the union for communications. So I am quite concerned that, that there are even these third party advertisers. Why do we have third party advertisers? And there are a number of them that are political, for the Liberals, for the NDP, and for the PCs.
But that's just free speech. There's no official connection between the parties and these advertisers, right?
Well, there is one for the union, and I can't remember the name of it. It was Better Something. Working families. I think the media has tied working families, I think it is, with the Liberals. Steve Payton on TVO says that Ontario Proud is the PC's secret weapon, or not so secret weapon. So, and they're there. But this is the problem. This interferes with democracy. This is the same as the survey. Oh my gosh, this is funny. So, I got a call last Friday night from this survey company in Montreal that will remain nameless. And this poor girl, I guess she called the wrong person. Because anyways, the first word out of my mouth was, who commissioned this survey? And she said, oh, well, I can't tell you that because, I don't have that information. And I said to her before she started recording, I said, well, I want to let you know that I am a candidate for a political party in Ontario. And she says, well, do you want to do the survey anyways? And I said, okay. And she says, are you all right if I record this? And I said, sure. And then I said again, I am a candidate for a political party. So then she went on to ask me my first question, if you are between the ages of da-da-da-da-da-da, and we got to my age, and I said, that's the one. Anyway, so there was a noise in the background. And she says, oh, well, I've met my quota. I can't give you the rest of the survey. And prior to that, though, she had said if I wanted to ask any questions about the questions on the survey, I could. So I said to her, well, okay, so we're not going to continue with the survey, but is this a political survey? Yes, it is. So I asked, who are the political parties named? And she said, well, they are the Liberals, the NDP, the PCs, and the Green Party. And I said to her, so technically this is a failed survey because there are 21 registered political parties in the province of Ontario. I said, on top of that, of those other 17, one of them actually has a sitting MPP and the Green Party does not. I said, then you have the fact that you had 600 members of a PC riding move from the PC party to the Trillium party. Anyways, she said, I didn't know anything about that. And I said, so technically your survey has skewed numbers because you do not have the proper criteria to actually fulfill the obligations of having an unbiased survey done because you have not represented all 21 parties. I said, so you might want to take that up with your supervisor.
Good call. I want to circle back to something you mentioned earlier, though, with regards to donations and political influence. What exactly do you mean by third-party advertisers?
So what they are is they are entities that may support a specific political ideology. And so they can register with Elections Ontario and they can advertise like 90 and spend copious amounts of money promoting their particular political ideology. Some of them are special interest groups. There's one that wants us to buy electricity from Quebec. So I did some snooping on that. And this entity actually is funded by renewable energy companies and a company from Montreal. So no wonder they want us to buy our electricity from Quebec.
So they're not necessarily aligned with the political party. They're literally aligned with an objective.
Yeah. Some of them actually have specific mandates, and some are just wanting certain political parties to win. That's it. And they can spend copious amounts of money. But face it, but the thing that got me about Mike Crawley's list, and I want to go back to that, why is there a bank donating to political parties at the provincial level? That's something everybody should be asking themselves.
Well,
why are banks? Why are, unions? This is an interference with our democratic rights.
Well, hang on. You're the legal researcher. Does the province have jurisdiction over any banking regulation?
No. And that's the whole thing. That is to be strictly federal jurisdiction. So why in the world would a bank be funding, I think it was like $145,000 to the Liberals and $99,000 to the PCs and $9,000 to the NDP?
Oh, okay. I actually do understand that bit. In gambling, that's called a hedge.
I guess.
So you bet heavily on the sure thing, but then you hedge your bets if you can find another bookie with different odds on the long shot.
Well, all I'm saying is, to me, this is such a vile attack on the democratic rights of the people of this province. That's why I'm doing this. I want democracy back. I want the law back. I want truth back. And I want people to have representation in Queen's Park. And it's got to be honest. We got to get rid of all of this cronyism, all of this. Like, everybody is just getting slammed for no reason.
Well, it sounds kind of like third-party advertisers are to politics what steroids are to sports.
I guess.
What I'm saying is, are you guys planning to roid up? Do you have any third-party advertisers in your sites who you want to bring on board?
No.
Okay.
And not only that, I've already made this statement. I cannot be bought. Don't even bother trying. If you want to donate, donate. But don't think I'm going to do you favors, particularly if it's going to hurt other people. Hit the bricks.
Is your last name Mulrooney?
Nope. And we don't want to go there either.
Greatest bribery case of all time.
Yeah, no. Actually, I had a constituent actually ask me that, and I just laid it on the line. I said, if anybody is foolish enough, I said, I've had MPPs tell me, you're not to talk about certain things. And I basically just said to them, listen, my dad had no ability to stop me from saying something. Do you think you're going to have a better chance? Like, think about that.
I guess not.
And don't forget, Dad may or may not have that belt, eh?
Okay, so we're getting a question from the audience. Tracy Yachuk writes, so far as the communications for third-party contributors, does that mean they're essentially paying the government for favors, such as positive media attention? Well, I guess it's not the government, it's just people who could potentially become government.
I would presume it is not for me to say yay or nay. How can I possibly know what's going through the minds of those that had been funding them prior to the change in the rules that are now third-party advertisers?
Well, because it's a lot harder to trace who was sending the money. Also, there are fewer limits.
Well, I would think so. Hey, remember, I'm not a lawyer. I don't give legal advice.
Fair enough.
All I know is if this is how people have to try and get elected, and that is the biggest problem. Kathleen Wynne is out there buying you with your own money. So, this is the problem. And actually, historically, when there are books out there that explain that when the political parties will do these things just merely for their own benefit to get elected, then that means the party system should be done away with. Period.
Well, I have to correct you. She's not buying you with your own money. She's borrowing money on your behalf and then giving you that.
She's borrowing from your kids and your grandkids and your grandkids.
Well, the joke's on her. I don't have kids, so...
Yeah, well, everybody else might have, though.
Okay.
And that's the whole thing. And
well, now one example of that, though, has to be the reduction in hydro bills. Now, you've done some legal research on this. How does that work?
Not legal research. Actually, it's just reading the Auditor General's report. And that's another reason why I'm at Trillium, because clearly we are supportive of the Auditor General. The Auditor General is what's supposed to be keeping government honest. So now with this Fair Hydro plan, this is such a bogus thing, and I can say that because it's bogus bookkeeping according to the Auditor General. Because what is happening is the debt that is being created is not showing as a debt against the province. So
debt being created to reduce hydro bills?
It is being hidden in through the IESO. So it won't show up on the provincial books. It's going to show up as an asset on the books of the IESO, the Independent Electricity Systems Operator, who, by the way, has bogus bookkeeping principles as well.
Well, hang on a second. So they've created an entity which they're borrowing money from, but they own the entity, so they're showing that as an asset.
Yep.
Enron would be proud.
Yeah, well, I'm kind of almost equating it because the Independent Electricity Systems Operator, the ISO, if you go through the Auditor General's report, you're going to go, pardon? Like, you are going to completely freak if you read through this thing. I knew it was really, really bad. And for the Auditor General actually to go and make a statement at committee, that is so rare. And she brings up the fact that you are actually violating Canadian Public Service accounting principles. You are cooking the books. She didn't say those words. Those are my books. You're cooking the books so that you do not have to show just how far in debt you are going to be placing the people of this province, their kids and their grandkids. And a lot of people go, well, these are really, really big numbers. Like, how can we possibly grasp these numbers? Well, look at it this way.
Scientific notation.
Well, okay, so look at it this way. So in Ontario, we have a deficit right now of $12 billion, right? We have approximately 14 million people in the province. Simple math. As it stands right now, when you roll out of bed in the morning, you owe a minimum of $22,000. Now think about that.
I'm a little short.
Well, that doesn't matter. It doesn't matter how tall you are.
I don't have the money either.
Bazinga. Anyways, but the whole thing is... there we are. Anyways, so every man, woman, and child, that's 22 grand before they roll out of bed in the morning. So a husband and wife, that's 44. When you got two kids, that's $88,000 your family owes before you roll out of bed in the morning. So she didn't want to show that on top of all of that, according to the Financial Accountability Officer, this is going to end up being possibly a debt added on of $69 to $93 billion that we aren't going to see on the books. Then, you got to think about this. So the PCs are now coming out, we want to reduce your hydro by another 12%. Well, that's going to add on up to maybe $140 billion now, isn't it? Especially if they do not change the bookkeeping, if they don't get rid of this fair hydro, if they don't get rid of these bogus contracts through this renewable energy, and that's, they're all the same and all to blame? Okay, 2013, Treasury Board comes out with a document in regards to the Samsung Korea Consortium agreement with the province. This is key. So the Treasury Board states in this that Samsung and Korea have failed to fulfill their obligations under the agreement. So if the province wants to get out of it, they can cancel that agreement, walk away with no penalties, and it will save Ontarians $5.2 billion.
But did we need more power production sources?
No, and that was the other thing that was in the document. We had a huge surplus of electricity. I think this was when we were actually giving it away to the United States or paying them to take it. So this is the key component on all of this. The PCs knew because Vic Fideli had the document in his possession. And he actually has it on his website, and he states it in his book that they knew about it in 2013, prior to the 2014 election. So if he knew about it, the NDP would know about it. Did Ontarians know about it? No. Because they didn't tell us. Now, do you think you couldn't win an election by telling people, hey, the Liberals are going to shaft you again with $5.2 billion because they're going to renegotiate this contract if you elect them? So I'm thinking Rex Murphy is right, that the PCs have actually mastered the art of political suicide.
I don't know. If a strong visionary leader like Tim Hudak couldn't take that information and turn it into a victory at Queen's Park, maybe it was impossible.
Well, I'm not going to touch that one with a 10-foot pole. Actually, Tim got himself a pretty posh little job because he's with the Ontario Real Estate Board now, I think.
Right on. So it all worked out in the end for Tim.
Yes, and Elizabeth Whitmer.
You know what, though, Elizabeth, I just have to say, all these concerns about the debt and hydro and subsidizing power bills, and it's not a big deal. Any day now, manufacturing is going to return to Ontario, and the wealth that it creates means we're all going to be fine. We don't have to worry. Deficits don't really matter.
Well, yes, Mr. Trudeau. The budget balances itself, right?
No, it doesn't balance itself. It's just manufacturing. It's going to pick up any day now.
Yeah, and that's okay. So the Fraser Institute just came out with a report, and manufacturing has decreased by, I think it was 64 to 68% because of the price of electricity in Ontario. Now, the province is tooting off that, oh no, we've got really great employment, we're way up there and everything else, except for they're taking their numbers from 2008 when we had the crash. The Fraser Institute actually went back prior to that to show that employment is actually decreased. So, and I would advise everyone to get a copy of that report. It was a very good report. And it explains the decrease in manufacturing jobs at that percentage was brought on entirely by the cost of electricity in this province. So unless you're one of those 65 that we're all subsidizing, I guess Ontario isn't here for you. Go somewhere else.
But surely, overall, the collapse of heavy industry is good for the environment. Like if heavy industry moves to Ohio or China, it's a net positive for the globe, right?
Oh yeah, and the wind doesn't blow from north to south or east to west. So in regards to the environmental things, actually McKenna, she was being interviewed at committee, and McKenna has absolutely no numbers as to what benefit percentage-wise or any type of numbers the $50 a ton carbon tax is actually going to do. And this is the thing. Everybody is on this climate change, and yet climate change and pollution are two entirely different things. And that is the misunderstanding of a lot of people. Now, if people really and truly want to understand climate change, I would suggest they get information on the Dansgaard Osher events or the Heinrich events. I've read them. And that is the Earth cycles and so on and so forth. And actually, this is hilarious. David Suzuki did a documentary, and it's called Geological Journey. And so they were talking about the glaciers and, climate change and so on and so forth. Well, they're saying, within another, few thousand years, I think it's Calgary or Edmonton's going to be under a foot of ice because the Earth keeps going through these cycles of warming and cooling. That's completely different from pollution. So when it comes to pollution, we've all got catalytic converters now on our vehicles, just like California. But we also have to look at the fact that Ontario is covered in farmland and trees. So why is the rest of the world just not paying us then? And then why are we in turn not paying the farmers?
If you can convince them, that would help the debt picture.
Oh, well. But you see, really and truly, the carbon tax is just a tax on rural Ontario. And this is the other thing, too. I want to go back to these political parties just for a second. So look at it this way. When you have whip votes, So if Mr. Toronto decides, and I mean Doug Ford, if he decides that he wants to take all of the infrastructure money out of rural Ontario to put his subway into Scarborough, there is nothing that those MPPs can do or say to stop him. And that goes the same for the backroom boys, because the backroom boys may very well benefit monetarily with putting that subway into Scarborough at the detriment to the people in rural Ontario. And then you have the carbon tax. And so everybody in rural Ontario has to drive everywhere. Farmers need fuel to actually survive because that is their occupation. So we are paying all of this carbon tax so that the urban residents can have public transit. Now, this is wrong because we aren't getting any benefit of that. Like if you go out drinking in an urban area, hot dog man.
Me? Never.
Yeah, well, I don't either.
Okay.
But this is the thing. So yeah, nod, wink, wink, say no more, say no more. But anyways, so you go out drinking, you can hop on public transit to get home in an urban area. If you're out in rural Ontario, it isn't going to happen because you have to drive 20 minutes, half an hour, or even 45 minutes to the nearest bar. So we're getting nailed with supposedly drinking and driving, even if you only have one beer, which I do not support drinking and driving. People get killed, and that's fine. It's not fine that they get killed.
I was going to say,
it's
I don't know
fine that
about
people
that
get
one.
charged. It's fine that people get charged. But on the other hand, they have to drive. It's the same with groceries. It's the same with baby food, diapers, you name it. You have to drive. And so everybody says, well, plan your time. Well, why should I have to plan my time and get nailed with an extra 4.3 cents on every dollar of fuel I put in my vehicle? As it stands right now, people in Ontario are paying 41 cents out of every dollar for gas. That's the tax. Like you've got your HST, you've got your road tax, you got your federal tax, and so that all adds up to being 37 cents. Then she's put on her 4.3 cents per buck carbon tax. So now, for every dollar you spend to put fuel in your vehicle, 41 cents of that goes to government. That's wrong.
Listen, I don't know if I'm a skeptic of climate change, and that's why I think it's important that we not use the carbon-intensive hydropower and nuclear power that previous governments were just letting go off into the atmosphere.
Yeah, well...
all of those dams in operation, we've stopped many of them, but there's more work to do.
Want to hear something funny? Okay, so in that report on how to govern Ontario, apparently Ontario Hydro wasted like somewhere between $475 and $500 million buying up the small hydroelectric generating systems throughout the province. And now we have the conservation authorities in consortium or in conjunction with Hydro One shutting down a lot of this stuff. And I guess they have been for a long time. Welcome to your debt retirement.
Fantastic. We're getting another reader comment from Amit Pitamber. Why wasn't this Samsung deal presented in the 2014 election?
Well, your guess is as good as mine. To me, it should have. But as I said, I'm of the opinion that so many entities are invested in this renewable energy that, so the majority of the public pensions are invested in subsidized entities. So all you really and truly have to do is start looking for where Borealis is putting their money, because that is the administrative company for the Ontario Municipal Employees Retirement Fund. You have to look where the school teachers' funds are going. But the majority of it is, if you start looking into the entities that are subsidized, all you have to do is follow the money. Period.
Are you saying we should put our own money in after them to sort of ride that corruption wave?
Well, the other thing too is, let's talk about breach of trust for a second here.
Okay.
Okay, so recently I was reading through some legislative debates, And the NDP came forward stating that the 407 was the PC's breach of trust for selling off that asset. And they were using that to basically take a shot at the PCs while taking a shot at the Liberals for the sell-off of Hydro. But they forgot to mention that Bob Rae started that little sell-off of asset snowballs when he started the sell-off of the land registry. So this is the biggest problem we have right now, is because when you look at the public assets being sold off, these are companies that are being created like MPAC, the Municipal Property Assessment Corporation, private corporation. Terranet actually owns the land registry. Well, Terranet's main shareholder at one point in time was actually Borealis, the Ontario Municipal Retirement Fund. So look at it this way. So through your property taxes, you are paying for your municipal employees. And you're also assisting in contributing to their retirement pension funds. On the other hand, you have this Borealis, which is taking that money and it's investing it into a monopoly created by government that has now a 50-year contract with government, a monopoly. And so it's always going to be making money. So it's basically subsidized because it has this 50-year contract, which, by the way, it only paid $1.3 billion to the provincial government so that Dalton McGuinty would not go over the $10 billion debt mark. That's the only reason they got this, because he finished it off by selling off the last, I think, 30 or 40%. So when you start following the money of the likes of Borealis or the Teachers Fund or anything else like that, you are going to see these blaring red flags of subsidized entities. Because, hey, we got to make sure that the public pensions are protected, but not yours.
But this is just good financial management. When you find yourself in a bit of a money crunch with a bit too much debt, you take your valuables to the pawn shop, and that gives you a bit of breathing room for a few months.
Well, the thing that really disturbs me is the people of this province are basically getting dinged like triple, quadruple times. Because if you have the public sector investing in public entities that are subsidized by the people's purse, then face it, that's triple, quadruple ding, man. Like that just is repugnant to humanity and is repugnant to what this province and this government, how it should be operating.
On the plus side, unlike the Americans with Social Security, it's unlikely the pension funds will be underfunded.
Oh, they won't ever be underfunded.
There you go.
But then on the other hand, I would rather have that money in my pocket, your pocket, and everybody else's pocket who's actually paying for all of this. I have nothing against, the public employees having good pensions. They're working for it. They're doing their time and everything else like that. But on the other hand, let's be fair here. This is a shell game that government is paying on the backs of honest, hard-working Ontarians. And it is wrong. And these MPPs that are in Queen's Park, they know darn well this is happening. So, anyways, I'm calming down a little bit here, so.
Well done. Looks like that's all the time we have for this week, but we're going to have you back on the show. I'm sure you have lots more to say. But Elizabeth, thank you very much for being part of Trillium Talk TV.
Well, no, thank you. And thank you for taking the time to hear just a little bit of what I have to say.
Good night, Ontario. See you next week.
Good night, everybody.